Welcome to Creepy, the best horror storyteller on YouTube.
John had always been a vivid dreamer, but one night, his dreams became a nightmare. He dreamed that he was being chased by a group of faceless creatures through a dark and twisted forest. He ran as fast as he could, but the creatures were always gaining on him. John woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to calm himself down, but the feeling of dread lingered. He knew that it was just a dream, but it felt so real. The next night, John had the same dream. He was chased by the faceless creatures again, and he couldn't wake up. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to run, but his legs were heavy and slow. Finally, John cornered by the creatures. They surrounded him, their black eyes glowing in the darkness. John closed his eyes and braced for the worst. But when he opened his eyes again, the creatures were gone. John was lying in his bed, awake. He sat up and took a deep breath. He was relieved to be back in the real world, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next night, John had the same dream again. And the night after that. And the night after that. John was trapped in a nightmare world. At first, John tried to ignore the nightmare world. He hoped that it would eventually go away on its own. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, John began to lose hope. John was starting to lose his grip on reality. He couldn't focus at work. He couldn't sleep. He was constantly on edge, waiting for the nightmare world to take over. One night, John had a different dream. He dreamed that he was in a white void. There was nothing else around him, just endless white space. John stood in the void, feeling lost and alone. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to get out. Suddenly, John heard a voice. "John," the voice said, "you're not alone." John turned around and saw a woman standing behind him. She was dressed in a white robe, her long hair flowing down her back. "Who are you?" John asked. "My name is not important," the woman said. "What's important is that I can help you." "How can you help me?" John asked. "I'm trapped in this nightmare world." "You can escape," the woman said. "But it won't be easy." "What do I have to do?" John asked. "You have to face your fears," the woman said. "You have to confront the things that torment you." John took a deep breath. He knew that the woman was right. He couldn't escape the nightmare world until he faced his fears. "I'm ready," John said. The woman smiled. "Then let us begin." The woman led John through the white void. They walked for hours, until they came to a dark door. "This is the gateway to the nightmare world," the woman said. "Are you sure you want to go through?" John nodded. He had to face his fears. The woman opened the door, and John stepped through. John found himself back in the nightmare world. But this time, he was different. He wasn't afraid. He knew that he could escape. John faced his fears one by one. He confronted the faceless creatures, the dark forest, and the other horrors that tormented him. Finally, John reached the end of the nightmare world. He stood on a cliff, overlooking a vast expanse of white space. John took a deep breath and jumped. John woke up in his bed. He was covered in sweat, but he was alive. He had escaped the nightmare world. John sat up in bed and looked around. He was back in the real world. He was finally free. But John knew that he would never forget the nightmare world. He had changed by his experience. He was no longer the same man he had been before. John got out of bed and went to the window. He looked out at the rising sun. He was grateful to be alive. He was grateful to be free. But John knew that the nightmare world was still out there. And he knew that there were other people trapped inside. John vowed to help them. He vowed to help them escape. John spent the next few days recovering from his ordeal in the nightmare world. He was exhausted and emotionally drained. But he knew that he couldn't rest for long. He had to find a way to help the other people who were trapped in the nightmare world. John started by talking to his friends and family. He told them about his experiences, but they didn't believe him. They thought he was crazy. John was disappointed, but he wasn't discouraged. He knew that he was telling the truth. And he knew that there were other people out there who had the same experiences as him. John started doing research on the nightmare world. He read everything he could find about sleep disorders, lucid dreaming, and other paranormal phenomena. John also started connecting with other people who claimed to have been trapped in the nightmare world. He found them online forums and support groups. John learned that he wasn't alone. There were other people out there who were trapped in the nightmare world. And they were all just as desperate to escape as he was. John decided to form a group with the other survivors. They called themselves the Dreamers. The Dreamers met regularly to share their experiences and support each other. They also worked together to develop strategies for escaping the nightmare world. The Dreamers learned that the nightmare world was a complex and dangerous place. It was ruled by a malevolent entity known as the Nightmare King. The Nightmare King was a powerful and ancient being. He had trapped countless people in the nightmare world over the centuries. The Dreamers knew that defeating the Nightmare King would be difficult, but they were determined to try. The Dreamers began to explore the nightmare world, mapping out its territory and identifying its weaknesses. They also started training themselves to fight the creatures that inhabited the nightmare world. The Dreamers faced many challenges along the way. They lost friends and loved ones. They were captured and tortured by the Nightmare King's minions. But the Dreamers never gave up. They knew that they had to escape the nightmare world, not just for themselves, but for all of the other people who were trapped inside. One day, the Dreamers discovered a secret passageway that led to the Nightmare King's castle. They knew that this was their chance to finally defeat him. The Dreamers gathered all of their strength and courage and entered the castle. They fought their way through the Nightmare King's minions and finally reached his throne room. The Nightmare King was waiting for them. He was a towering figure with dark skin and glowing red eyes. "So, you have finally come to challenge me," the Nightmare King said. "But you are no match for my power." The Dreamers knew that the Nightmare King was right. He was much more powerful than any of them individually. But they were determined to defeat him together. The Dreamers attacked the Nightmare King as one. They fought him with all of their might. The battle was long and fierce. But in the end, the Dreamers emerged victorious. They defeated the Nightmare King and shattered his power. With the Nightmare King defeated, the nightmare world began to crumble. The Dreamers found themselves back in the real world, free at last. But the Dreamers knew that their work was not done. The Nightmare King was gone, but there were still other people who were trapped in the nightmare world. The Dreamers vowed to help them escape. They vowed to fight against the forces of darkness and protect the innocent. The Dreamers became a force for good in the world. They used their knowledge of the nightmare world to help others and to make the world a safer place. John was proud of what the Dreamers had accomplished. He knew that they had made a difference in the world. But John also knew that the nightmare world was still out there. and he knew that there would always be people who needed their help. John vowed to continue fighting the forces of darkness. He vowed to protect the innocent and to make the world a better place. One dream at a time. The dreamers had defeated the Nightmare King, but they knew that their work was not done. There were still other people trapped in the nightmare world, and there was still the danger that the Nightmare King could return. The dreamers decided to open a school to teach people how to protect themselves from the nightmare world. They taught people about the dangers of sleep, how to lucid dream, and how to fight the creatures that inhabited the nightmare world. The dreamers also continued to explore the nightmare world, looking for new ways to help people escape. They discovered that there were many different ways to enter the nightmare world, and that there were many different ways to escape. The dreamers shared their knowledge with others, and soon there was a network of people helping others to escape the nightmare world. John was proud of what the dreamers had accomplished. He knew that they had made a difference in the world. He had helped many people to escape the nightmare world, and he had helped to make the world a safer place. But John also knew that there was still more work to be done. There were still people trapped in the nightmare world, and there was still the danger that the Nightmare King could return. One day, John was teaching a class at the Dreamers' School when he felt a sudden chill. He looked up and saw a dark figure standing at the back of the room. The figure was tall and thin, with pale skin and glowing red eyes. It was the Nightmare King. The Nightmare King smiled at John. "I'm back," he said. John's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that he had to fight the Nightmare King, but he also knew that he was no match for him on his own. The Nightmare King raised his hand, and a blast of dark energy shot towards John. John dodged the blast, but he knew that he couldn't keep dodging forever. John closed his eyes and concentrated. He focused on his inner strength and his will to survive. When John opened his eyes, he was transformed. He was now taller and stronger. His eyes glowed with a golden light. John attacked the Nightmare King with all of his might. The two of them fought fiercely, but John was too strong. He defeated the Nightmare King once again. With the Nightmare King defeated, the dreamers knew that the nightmare world was safe for now. But they also knew that they had to be vigilant. The Nightmare King could return at any time. The dreamers continued to train and to teach others how to protect themselves from the nightmare world. They knew that they had to be ready for anything. John was proud of what the dreamers had accomplished. He knew that they had made a difference in the world. He had helped many people to escape the nightmare world, and he had helped to make the world a safer place. But John also knew that their work was never done. The nightmare world was always there, lurking in the shadows. But the dreamers would be ready for it.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more similar horror stories.